All right, everybody. Welcome. We are on meeting number 4, I believe. I feel right. Yeah, meeting number 4 of the YFP Fellowship. We're going to go over student loan analysis today. So before I dive into that, does anybody have any big issues, questions, comments, or concerns that they feel the need to share? Did anybody have any issues getting their NSLDS file down? Or does anybody not know what I'm talking about at all? I think I saw everybody here's stuff. Nope. All right. So the goal today will be for you to walk away understanding more about student loans in general. And then if we can, then we'll talk specifically about whoever wants to share student loans. Everybody should have received an email from me within the last like 20 or 30 minutes, kind of with some data back. So thankfully you shared your NSLDS file, which is that really gorgeous .txt notepad stuff. What you got back was a little bit easier to read. And we'll discuss that a little farther when we get there. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. We're gonna jump right in. I am totally okay with y'all interrupting me at any point during this to ask questions. So please let me know. If you put something in the chat, Kim can read it out as well. So y'all can see my screen now? Can I get a head nod from somebody? Thank you much. All right. So we're going to talk about kind of some statistics, how to run an inventory, a little bit of strategy stuff, and then maybe we'll do some recommendations on the back end. All right. So student loan stats. There's a lot of it. So $1.5 trillion issue in the US, right? So that's 46 million Americans own money to student loans. So you are definitely not alone if you have them by a long shot. 4X is the factor how that's increased for consumers age 60 plus. So it's not just young Americans that have student loan problem. It's also old Americans that are having student loan problems for a number of reasons, right? So when we're first looking at student loans, we have to figure out how do we figure out the inventory? How do we know what we have? I imagine even a week ago, if I would have asked some of you, how much student loan debt do you have? You'd say a lot, or I don't want to know, is a really common answer. So here's what we do. How do we figure it out? So the federal student loans is what we're gonna talk mostly about today. So for that, we look at the NSLDS file, right? So you all pulled that. Thank you. That's that National Student Loan Data System file. It's really gorgeous. It's that .txt. There's a bunch of different types of student loans, right? So you could have direct loans, you could have FFEL loans, you could have Perkins loans. Those could be all subsidized or unsubsidized, graduate or undergraduate, and they'll all be listed out on there. For private loans, it's a little more difficult. So for private loans, we have to go to credit report. So everybody would pull their credit report and you could review that. And you can say, yeah, these are all my loans on there. And then you can go to those servicers directly and find out the terms of those loans if you have them or not. Does anybody know what these terms down here mean? Refinance or consolidation? Do I want to take a shot? Let's see who's willing to share today. Nobody yet? Totally fair. Here we go.
So refinance. Oh yeah. Talking about just refinancing at a better rate with one of the private loan companies, and then consolidation in my own terms, which I'm sure there's several, but I think of within like the federal program consolidating into one big loan instead of having several small ones.
Dead on, man. Yeah. So refinance is when you take any loan that you have and you swap it out with another loan, but it has to be private. So there is no such thing as a public or federal refinance. So if you refinance, you're taking whatever loan you have and you're making it private, right? Consolidation, as he said, is you just take a bunch of loans and you smash them together, right? So if you have, let's say somebody on this call here has like 27 different loans, they could smash all their loans together and turn it into maybe 1 or 2 loans. generally that would be a direct consolidated subsidized loan for all your undergraduate, and it would be direct consolidated unsubsidized for all your other loans, so you're either graduate or undergraduate. Does that make sense? So some people actually need to do that from time to time to make sure that they qualify, right? So I mentioned there's a bunch of different types of loans in the federal system, right? So FFEL, Federal, Perkins, right? You're kind of the big players. FFEL loans are not eligible for some of the loan forgiveness programs we're going to talk about. So you would need to consolidate those loans first into direct consolidated loans. And we'll talk about that a little more here in a little bit. Any questions about this page?
I think you're probably going to get into it, but when you refinance, because like typically they'll say like, oh, you can get like way better interest rates when you refinance. Mm-hmm. Is the reason why you don't, like what is the main reason why you don't do that is because you want some of the options that like a government loan gives you, aka like you don't have to pay it yet and things like that. Like for me, like I can go like super income based and like for a year of residency, and like is that the main reason why? Because in my head you just want to refinance because it's a better interest rate instead of like the obscene amounts we do now.
Yeah, so if you're playing just a pure interest rate games, the private side is going to have much better rates. So federal student loan rates, so most of your guys' loans are probably federal. If you were to look at those loan rates, they're all going to be between like 5 and 7%. So those rates are actually set by Congress. They're not set by the market, and they're dead on. So a lot of you who went to school at the same time are going to have the exact same interest rate no matter what your situation was. In the private side, it's decided by the market, right? So right now, interest rates are really low. So Steven's question here is, why wouldn't everyone just refinance down if they're trying to get a better rate? And it's really going to come down to the math, right? So if I'm trying to pay it off as fast as I can, I probably want the best interest rate. If I'm trying to take advantage of some of those options that you said, like whether it's income-driven plans or grace periods or forbearances or forgiveness or anything like that, then we have to stay in the federal system. So although private side companies are coming up with better tactics to make their products more appealing, nobody has the benefits or the options available that are on the federal side. But we'll definitely talk some more. You got some else?
Oh, sorry, I had another question. Going off tangent, but is it true that with like if you go private, they're like less forgiving if you can't pay off?
Yeah. So private.
I've heard that it's like pretty scary stuff. Like if you can't, like with the government, there's options and you can like appeal and all that jazz. But with a private loan, like it's bad.
Yeah. So student loans are treated a different way than like any other debt. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit actually. But one of the things is like you can't bankrupt yourself out of student loans. Like they'll live with you forever. If you're unable to pay, which is kind of the question here, the federal system definitely has stuff in order, whether it's income-driven plans or it's more forbearance or anything like that. The private side may or may not have that, right? So these are private lenders with their own rules and you got to pay. So you may be able to work out something there. You may have some forbearance there. You may have a new payment plan there, but it's not as blunt and laid out as there is in the federal system. So if payment was a worry, I would definitely want to stay in the federal system if you can. All right. So how do we do an inventory of this, right? So what we want to know is we want to know the balance remaining, right? So that's the principal and the interest. So most of you people, or I'm sure you're finance majors, you know all about math and everything, you're great. Normally interest compounds, right? So interest rolls back into the principal. So right now you're not paying anything. So you would assume that your interest is going to roll into your principal, but it's not. In student loans, they don't have compound interest. We have what's called simple interest. So if you have student loans of say $100,000 and you had a 5% interest, you would pay $5,000 per year in interest. If you didn't pay any interest in 1 year, the next year, you would still only pay $5,000. You wouldn't have to pay interest on your interest. Does that make sense? I got a couple head nods. Does that not make sense to anybody? I will definitely try a better way to explain it. If you don't tell me, I can't know. All right, yeah, so simple interest is great because it keeps the amount of interest you have down. But when you review your loans, what you'll see is you'll see something called principal, and you'll generally see something called accrued interest, because that interest, that $5,000 in my scenario, just gets put off into a bucket on the side. And you have to pay that off first before you can make any principal payments. All right. So we'll touch on that. I see your face. We'll touch on that here in a little bit as well. We want to know what the interest rate is, right? I want to know what interest am I paying on this debt, if any, right now. What status am I in, right? That's really going to say, am I in repayment? Am I in grace period? Am I in forbearance? Most of you are probably in a grace period right now. What's my repayment start date? Meaning, when did I start making payments to this plan? And then what's my repayment plan? Meaning, how are my payments being calculated? And we'll talk about all that here in a minute. But there's also the emotional inventory, right? So the numbers are the easy part, but the emotional side is what I can't calculate for most of the time. So do I have competing priorities, right? We have some people here that say, I want to pay these loans off as soon as possible. And we had people last week that said, I want to pay my student loans off, but I also want to get another house. I also want to do this stuff, right? So do I have other debt? Is there investing I want to do? Lifestyle growth or change, travel, wedding, home purchase, kids college. What can you afford to pay to student loans is important. How confident are you in your career path is going to be very important when we start talking about loan forgiveness programs. And then how do you feel about your loans, right? Do your loans, Austin, do your loans keep you up crying at night, man? Like, that's really important if that happens. Stephen, if you don't care at all about your student loans, super important to know. Lindsay, if you're just like, I love these loans, I want them forever, like super important to know that as we go in to this process. So the emotional inventory is just as important as the financial inventory. So repayment strategies, right? So any kind of debt you have to pay back, right? So when we're talking about federal student loans, we have repayment strategies of, we can go for forgiveness or we can go for non-forgiveness, right? So forgiveness would be the government luckily will pay back some of my stuff if I do everything just right. Non-forgiveness means I pay back my bills, right? This is just like every other debt. So this is the big player in the field. This is public service loan forgiveness. Round of a hand, who's shooting for this right now? 1, 2, 3, we got some, okay. Well, one way up there, okay. So public service loan forgiveness, what is it about? So this is a loan forgiveness program where you have to work for the right type of employer, right? And what that means is you have to work for a not-for-profit organization. So that you could work for federal, state, local, tribal, municipal, any kind of organization that's not for profit, or a charitable organization, right? So the designation there would be a 501c3 is the tax designation. So you have to work for the right type of employer. You have to have the right kind of loan, right? So effectively you have to have direct loans. So if any of your loans don't say direct in the word, then you want to look at them very closely. So if any of your loans say FFEL, if any of your loans say Perkins, they may qualify, but if not, we want to consolidate them into direct loans. If you have Parent Plus loans, if you have Grad Plus loans, right? Those are still direct, but you can roll those up if you want. You have to be in the right repayment plan, right? So that would be in any one of the income-driven plans that I will be explaining here shortly. You have to make the right amount of payments. That is 120 full on-time payments. That's effectively 10 years, right? It doesn't have to be consecutive, but it has to be cumulative. And you have to have paid a total of 120 on-time payments. If you miss a payment in there, if you go into forbearance, if you skip, if you stop working, yada, 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 those are fine. We just have to make total payments, okay? And then you have to prove it. So then you have to submit all the paperwork that says, hey, I've been working for the right people for the right amount of time. I got the right types of loans. I'm doing the right repayment plans. I made all these payments, and you submit your documents. If and when that happens, you get tax-free forgiveness, meaning one day you had $200,000 worth of loans and the next day you have nothing. It is that simple. Now, this program has a lot of issues and problems, but a lot of promise, right? So the controversy here is it's been around for a long time. Okay, so this program started it was signing up in the bill 2007, and it really started in 2008. Okay, so people had to make 10 years of loans there. There's been changes in the administration along the way, but the program itself has been pretty strong. So since it started in 2008, the first time that somebody got loans forgiven was 2018. And I don't know if y'all remember this, but there was a big stink because 30,000 people applied for forgiveness and 92 got approved. That's a very small number, right? And I would argue that the reason that happened is because the other 29,908 people didn't qualify. They shouldn't have applied to begin with. Some of that was because they didn't have the right types of loans. Some people weren't the right employers. Some people weren't the right. If I ever freeze today, by the way, please, somebody, Kim, message me because I had internet issues earlier, but they didn't have the right types of loans. They didn't have the right repayment plans. They didn't have the right number, or they missed things along the way. They didn't qualify. You had to have had, go ahead.
Couple of questions.
Yeah.
For those 120 payments, can you make payments right now while we're in our deferment stage? Like just a small payment to get that started?
So payments you make right now, if you're in a grace period, so right, if you're in the 6 months after graduation, you all graduated in May, in that 6 month period, you cannot make payments. You could send them money and they'll take it, but it won't count, right?
Okay.
What you could do, right, is you could consolidate your loans, right? So Sonia, I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say you have 10 different loans.
Uh-huh.
You could consolidate those into 2 loans, and you could pick your start date as next month and say, I want to start making payments next month, right? Right now, for the next 2 months, we are in the administrative forbearance. So thanks to the CARES Act that came out during COVID, the CARES Act said that all student loans and all student loan payments are going to zero. Yeah. So everybody's going to pay $0 and everybody's going to have 0% interest, which is a phenomenal gift that the government gave. It didn't really impact y'all because y'all are in grace period anyway. But if you were to consolidate your loans, I'm choosing the words, consolidate, not refinance.
Right.
If you were to consolidate your loans, your loan would then be brand new. You'd have 2 loans, one unsubsidized and one subsidized, if you have subsidized loans. Mm-hmm. And then you could pick to start making payments next month. And then you would have $0 payments. And these $0 payments count towards your 120 payments if you are going for public service loan forgiveness or any of the other loan forgiveness programs. Does that make sense?
It does. And the second question I had was, all of our loans need to be direct? Because I have like 2 or 3 FFELs or whatever the initials are. So I would need to consolidate so that they would all then be direct.
So the PSLF program can only work for loans that they work for, right? So loans that were outside of that just wouldn't qualify. So if you had loans that did not qualify, even if you had 120 payments, everything else would go away and those would still be here.
Okay, so I could choose to still pay those if I didn't want to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions real fast? Nope. And guys, feel free to interrupt like that. It's totally valuable. So the 2018, again, 92 got approved. The following year, 100,000 people applied and 1,000 got approved. So, hey, we made it to 1%. We don't have the numbers for this year, but this year is going to be a very large amount of people getting approved, right? So I mentioned it started in 2008. All the right types of loans, right? All these direct loans, all these good repayment plans I'm about to talk about, those kind of all came to fruition in 2010. So the people who automatically were going to start qualifying for this started in 2010. So it's now been 10 years this year. So this year we're going to start seeing people get money approved at the end of the year. And I'm really excited to see that. And every year after this, we're going to start seeing more and more people get money approved. But there's been millions of dollars that have been forgiven so far, and there's going to be millions more. Can this be eliminated or capped? No, it cannot. It is written into your student loans as contracts, okay? Your student loans cannot be capped or eliminated. Future generations, it's totally going to go away. There's no way this program is going to last forever, but your loans are already there, okay? And will the program be grandfathered? Yes. So the way that it generally works when these types of changes go is if they decide to ever eliminate or cap this program, anyone that already has loans and is already in the process of this repayment plan or programs will be grandfathered in, meaning you'll still qualify in the future. One of the big things I like about this program is there are a lot of lawyers that are defense attorneys that are using this program to get forgiveness, and they will fight tooth and nail to make sure they get forgiveness, which means you will also get the benefit of their fight, right? So it's a great little push there. Any questions about this so far? We got a lot more coming. All right, cool. So the chronology. So how does this timeline really work, right? So the first thing you always have to do is you need to check your employer classification, right? So does the person I work for, or does the person I'm about to work for actually qualify under a qualified not-for-profit organization, right? I'll use an example. Kaiser Permanente, huge hospital system, right? They have 3 arms in their system, 2 of which are not for profit, 1 of which is for profit. So although Kaiser Permanente sounds like a hospital system that should qualify, if you work for the wrong organization, you don't qualify, right? So they have Kaiser Permanente hospitals, they have Kaiser Permanente Foundation, and they have Kaiser Permanente's doctor group. The doctor group does not qualify for PSLF forgiveness. So you need to make sure the actual organization that's paying you qualifies. That's very important. Then you'd want to go ahead and consolidate your loans if need be. Not everyone needs to consolidate loans, it's not necessary. But if you have loans that don't qualify, you'd want to consolidate them to make them qualify. Then you'd start submitting your employment certification form, which I'll show you here in a minute. And what that does is that says, hey, this is my employer. They totally qualify. And they say, I totally work there full time. And then you submit that every year. So that way you have the records to prove at the end of your 10 years or 120 payments that you did qualify the entire time. Then you start tracking your payments and say, hey, I know that I'm submitting these documents. I'm counting my payments. Once you get into the program and you're approved to do it, they'll start calculating for you, but they'll only calculate every year when you submit your certification. So you want to make sure that they're tracking appropriately because your payments are going to go from 0 to 6 to 18, and you're going to miss the count along the way. Emily, I'm going to get to you in a minute.
No problem.
I'll be right there. And then you have to resubmit that every year. And then at the end of 120 payments, you apply and say, hey, I got all this. Please approve me and please give me this free money. Somebody just joined in named user. They might be getting booted here shortly. Emily, questions?
Yeah, so when you say submit that certification annually, does that mean every calendar year or, you know, like a year from the day that you submitted it the first time?
Yeah. So technically you don't have to submit every year, right? It's just a good practice and good policy. So you can go off of whatever schedule you want. When you submit, they will update your records. So if you want to make it on your employment anniversary, if you want to make it at the end of the year, if you want to make it on your birthday, whatever you want to do, you can set that schedule. The idea there is just to have consistent records to prove that you are qualifying the entire time. Does that make sense? In all factuality, if you worked for the same organization for 10 years, you could just submit one document at the end that says, I work here from here to here. But since you move employers, it's going to happen in your career. And having to, instead of going back to that employer and saying, hey, please say that I work there, I'd rather have those documents ahead of time. Does that make sense? All right. Employers should know if they qualify for this program. It's not like 2011 when it just came out and nobody knows about it. The people there are going to know if they qualify for PSLF because other doctors there are going to be going for PSLF. If no one in your organization is going for PSLF, either what the fuck is happening or they don't qualify, right? If you're going to change organizations in the future, ask around. You should be able to track that. There's also programs you can look online. You can look up 501c3 organizations, Fed loans, and studentloans.gov actually has a program where you can do a search by the employer identification number, the EIN, which is on your W-2 statements of if they qualify. And those programs are going to improve over time, especially year after year when we start getting more and more people applying for and being approved for this program. So this is that employment certification form. It's gorgeous. Basically, hey, here's who I am. I worked at a place, and they fill it out. At the end, you fill out a very similar form. It says, hey, here's who I am. I totally did all these things. Please give me free money. These forms may change over time, so I'm not really going to focus on this. But when you're filling it out, you can look on studentloans.gov to get this. All right. There's also non-PSLF forgiveness, right? So let's say I want forgiveness, but I don't work for one of those employers that works there, right? So I work for a for-profit. Let's say I work at Walgreens, or I work at CVS, or I work at the Piggly Wiggly, and that's what I'm doing. So you can still get forgiveness. It's just different, right? So I don't have to work for the right type of employer. I can work for whoever I want. I still have to have the right types of loans. So you still have to have those direct loans. So you still may have to consolidate. You still have to be in the right type of repayment plan, which I'll cover here shortly. You still have to make the right amount of payments, but now instead of 10 years, it's either 20 or 25 years. depending on your program, right? So PSLF is 120 payments. Non-PSLF forgiveness is either 240 or 300 payments, depending on your specific plan. And I'll touch on that here in a minute. You don't have to prove as much, right? Because I don't have to prove that I work for the right type of employer, so I just have to prove the payments. And then when you apply for forgiveness, it's no longer tax-free. Now it's taxable. So let's say you get to the end of that yellow brick road and you have $200,000 of loan still. They forgive it, it goes away. But on your taxes that year, it's going to look like you received an additional $200,000 of income that you didn't actually receive. Which, if you're making good money, would push your income into like 350 range or more if you have a household with another earner. So that means you're going to be paying 30 to 35% income taxes. So then you're going to be owing the government somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000 on a tax bill for money that you didn't actually receive. So definitely a good thing. I'd rather pay $50,000 than $200,000. Still a good deal, but you need to prepare for that in advance so you're not surprised by that tax bill. Does that make sense? All right, cool. I got some nods. And then there's non-forgiveness, right? Non-forgiveness just means you pay your bills. Boring, faster. So the standard repayment is 10 years. So what the majority of you are going to default to, if you don't pick your loan repayment program, is going to be 10 years, right? So come October, maybe here shortly, you should be getting things to choose your repayment plan. And if you don't choose anything, you'll automatically default to the standard 10-year payment, which is just 10 years worth of fixed payments. If you're going for non-forgiveness, you're going to pay it off. If you pay earlier, you pay less in interest, so it's cheaper overall, but your monthly payments will be higher. If you pay it off slower, your monthly payments will be lower, but you'll pay more in interest, right? So it costs more. The maximum you can stretch out for non-forgiveness for federal loans is 30 years. For private loans, it's whatever you choose with the servicer. Any questions so far? Nope. All right. So let's talk about federal repayment plans, right? So you have all the options you're going to choose for repayment plans, right? So we have the base plans and we have the income-driven plans. All right. So for the base plans, you have the standard payment, right? Again, I said that was 10 years of fixed payments. You have the graduated plan. The graduated plan says, hey, I'm not going to earn as much when I first graduate, and I want my payments to escalate over time. So I want them to gradually get more expensive. So every 2 years, your payments will increase until you finally pay it off, right? So the graduated plan is still 10 years, but it starts off lower and it gets up higher. The extended fixed takes that 10-year flat payments and stretches it out to 20 or 25 or 30 years. The extended graduated takes that graduated plan and extends it out to 20, 25, or 30 years. Any questions about these plans? Nope. Okay. And then we have the income-driven plans. I'm going to be very specific in the words I use here. Income-driven plans, IDRs, okay? The reason I say that is because there is one called income-based repayment. This is what everyone uses as a term when they mean this. This is just an umbrella term. This is an actual plan, okay? Then there's income contingent, pay as you earn, and revised pay as you earn, okay? So I'm standing up here and you have 8 different plans to choose from, and that's a lot to make a decision on, right? So what I'm gonna do here is a lot of these suck. Cool, so we never wanna do graduated, we never wanna do extended fixed, and we never wanna do extended graduated. The reason is because they suck. So the standard 10-year payment is flat fixed. If I pay graduated, it sounds better because I have less payments up front, but in reality, I'm just gonna pay more interest, okay? Extended and extended, that means more interest, right? So if you're gonna pay it off in a standard plan, use the standard plan, okay? Any questions about this so far? No, okay. Income-driven plans. Income-driven plans, Income-driven plans work by calculating your AGI. So your AGI stands for your adjusted gross income. All right, so that's be on the end of the year, your taxes. So you look at the income-driven, your adjusted gross income from the prior year. They look at your tax filing status. So that would say I am single, I am married filing jointly, married filing separately, I'm a head of household, I'm a qualified widow or widower. Your family size, which is how many people are in your household. So if it's you, a spouse, a child, and your state of residence. And effectively, this only matters if you are in Alaska, Hawaii, or the rest of America. Those are the three categories there. So lower 48, Alaska, or Hawaii. And they do a calculation that says, calculate all that number, take off your discretionary income. Okay, so discretionary income, they calculate and they say your AGI minus 150% of the poverty line. So for single folks here, that's roughly $16,000. So your adjusted gross income minus 16, that's your discretionary income. And they charge a percentage of that. And I'll talk about what those percentages are. For married people, you get 150% of the poverty line, which is your 16,000, and then you get to add like $6,000 for each person in your household. So if you have, Stephen, when you have two kids, so there's 4 people in your household, so you're somewhere in like the $26,000, $27,000 range that you can just subtract right off the top. So your adjusted gross income minus that number gives you your discretionary income, and they use that to calculate how much you pay. It's confusing, but is that we're good so far? Kinda, okay. And then every single year you would resubmit those numbers and they would recalculate what your fee is. So with the standard repayment, you just pay the same thing for the next 10 years. With income driven, as your income changes up or down, your student loan payments will change up or down. And it will always be a percentage of your income. Never more, never less. Does that make sense?
And just to confirm, it's based off of the data from the prior year.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they ask you, when you're filing this thing is, what's your tax information? And they'll look at your prior year's taxes. And then they'll say like, has your income substantially changed since then? And the answer is no. Unless your income has gone down, in which case the answer is yes. I would gladly tell you my income is lower. If you want to know if my income is higher, please look at my last year's taxes, right? So for all of you who are doing income-driven plan this first year, they're looking at your 2019 taxes. Who made money in 2019? Probably nobody here. And if you did, those cutting boards can't sell for that much. So they can't be a whole lot. So that's good. So that means your first year of payments, no matter what the government does with student loan rates, your first year of payments can be based on 2019 figures. So your payment should be pretty low. Next year, you're going to recertify, and you're only going to have half a year in 2020 that you're going to be making any income. So boom, next year's payments are going to be super low too. So now we're all the way up to the third year before we have one full year of employment. And that first year of employment may have been residency still. So that means even the third year of student loan payments are probably going to be pretty low. Does that make sense? So Stephen, earlier you asked like, why not refinance? I just gave you 3 years of less than normal student loan payments because we stayed in the federal program rather than refinancing out to the private program. Does that make sense? Yeah.
But I mean, like that's true, but I was putting less towards my loans that whole time, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Like
so what I'm doing is I'm changing your minimum payment. If you're trying to be aggressive, you can still be aggressive and all that, but your minimum payment would be much lower. So on a month-to-month basis, if you had more money to throw at it, let's throw that there. If you don't have more money, you're protected and you're not having to worry about not paying it off. Right? So we'll touch on refinancing now.
And so I had a quick question. When you were saying, when you're calculating, you said like AGI minus 16,000 minus 6,000 per, was that per child or per household?
So you can actually do this calculation online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's you just take the 150% of the poverty line. So if you were to Google poverty line and you type in your state, it'll give you a chart and it'll say family size and it'll say like deduction or a number. And it'll be like, oh, I have 5 people and it tells me this, I multiply that by 150% and that gives me that's your non-discretionary income, basically. This is what the government says you need to survive. I'm not 100%. I don't want to pitch it perfect numbers because I know I don't have them in my head. But that chart is there. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. All right, so the 2 plans that I said earlier for income driven that were good were either pay as you earn, PAYE, or revise pay as you earn, REPAYE. You may also see one called new IBR, income-based repayment. That's effectively PAYE. So we're going to talk about it here together. All right. Has anybody started making student loan payments yet? Is anybody on one of these payment plans yet? No, you shouldn't be. Okay. So what we care about is who's eligible. So we have PSLF and non-PSLF. That's its own thing based on the employer. But the forgiveness part depends on the loans, right? So who's eligible? Direct loans. You have to have direct loans to be eligible. So it's either direct undergraduate, direct graduate, direct plus, direct blah, 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 or consolidated direct. Terms of the conditions. So for public service, it's 10 years, but non-public service is 20 years. So 20 years with the balance forgiven thereafter. If you have a spouse at any time during this process, spousal income does not count as a part of your adjusted gross income if you file separately. So earlier I asked you for your tax filing status. So you could file single, married filing jointly, married filing separately is an option. So for instance, if you make a fair amount of money and your spouse doesn't make much money, doesn't matter. If you don't make much money because you're a resident and your spouse makes a ton of money, I don't want to include my spouse's income in my calculation for how much money we make. I want to game this program if I'm going for forgiveness. If I'm not going for forgiveness, I'm going to pay this off anyway. I don't really care about the minimum. But if we want to try to game it for the minimums, this is a big tool. Earlier we talked about how they calculate AGI minus your 150% poverty line gives you that number. Payee charges you 10% of that number every year, right? So whatever that number is, 10% of that, and then you'll pay it all out, you'll pay it out monthly. So if you had an adjusted gross income minus the poverty line tells you I have $100,000 left, that means I have to pay $10,000 a year to student loans. So it works out to like $800 a month, okay? But that number can never be more than the standard payment. So your standard payment was whatever your student loans is over 10 years. So no matter what, this payment can never be higher than that. So it's an upper limit, which may not be valuable early on because you're not going to be making very much payments. But later on, when you're making a ton of money, you want that upper ceiling so you can still go towards forgiveness. Does that make sense? All right, cool. And then we talk about like, who's it for? It's for people who are going for forgiveness, whether it's public service or non-public service, okay? This is a great plan. It keeps your payments to a minimum, or it gives you the flexibility if you're trying to pay it back, but you're not sure that you can do it. Does that make sense? Maybe I want to pay my student loans back in the next 7 years, but I don't want to lock myself into it. So maybe I'll stay in PAYE. I'll pay a little bit of extra interest, but it gives me the flexibility to change my mind as I go.
With the balance being forgiven, is it like when it does get forgiven, is it taxable?
It depends if you did the public service route or the non-public service route.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So that's a totally valid question. I don't think I made that clear enough. So the PSLF or non-PSLF are the forgiveness routes. These are just repayment plans. So this just decides how I'm going to pay my student loans. How much is my student loan bill every month? And this decides that. All right. The next one would be revised pay-as-you-earn. So revised pay-as-you-earn came out a little bit later. It was changed, so it was a little bit different. So they revised it, right? You still have to have direct loans to be eligible. One change here is if you have 20 years, it's 20 years for undergraduate loans for non-public service forgiveness, and it's 25 years if you have graduate loans. So all of you have graduate loans more than likely. So if you're going for non-public service forgiveness, it would take you 25 years to achieve that forgiveness. Does that make sense? Another big difference there, spousal income counts regardless of your filing status, okay? So if you have a spouse and they are a higher earner, their income is going to count when we do that calculation. Now it's that same 10%, so it's still 10% of whatever your discretionary income is. And the big one here is this is mostly, you'd say this for residents, okay? And the reason for that is there's an interest subsidy, okay? So let's say I have student loans, right? And they're gonna accrue like $50 a day. I don't know if you guys have ever done the math on your student loans, but that's kind of where that number is. So let's say your student loan payments are zero because I'm a resident, and while I was in school, my 4th year, I didn't make any money. So last year's taxes, I didn't make any money. My student loans are $0. That is a full on-time payment, but it's obviously not covering your interest, right? So what this means is if you're in repayee and you make those $0 payments, a portion of that will be forgiven or subsidized by the government. So instead of that accrued interest bucket getting higher and higher, part of that's going to be subsidized, okay? So for subsidized loans, so all your undergraduate loans, if you're in repayee and you don't pay enough to pay the interest, the full amount will be subsidized for the first 3 years, and half of that amount, the extra interest that you're not paying, would be subsidized after 3 years. Does that make sense? Feel free to say no. It does not make sense. Perfect. Okay. If I have a bill and my bill is $0 because I don't owe any money, but I'm accruing $20 a day in interest. That means I owe $600 a month in interest, right? I'm paying $0. I'm accruing $600 a month. If I have repayee, and if I have subsidized loans for the first 3 years, all of that interest that I'm not paying is going to be subsidized by the government. Meaning they're going to take it, it doesn't accrue. So I still have no accrued interest. If I have unsubsidized loans, half of that money will be subsidized by the government. So all your graduate loans, 50% will be subsidized for the first 3 years. Does that make sense? After 3 years, subsidized loans goes to 50%. So it basically just means if I'm in a resident, I'm not earning a lot of money, or if I'm in a job where I'm not earning a lot of money, and I'm not going to pay back the interest every month, repayee is going to be better for me because I'm at least getting some of that subsidized by the government. Some of you may not qualify for PAYE, and you may not qualify because your loans are too old. So to qualify for PAYE, pay as you earn, you have to be, quote, a new borrower in October of 2007. So that means you cannot have any student loans, even if you paid them off, from prior to October of 2007. It's not going to be most of you. Most of you are not old enough to be in college in 2007. But some of you may, some of you are. Repayee does not matter when your loans are. So you'd still qualify for repayee. Does that make sense? So most of you are going to qualify for PAYE. All of you will qualify for RE, PAYE. All right. Any questions so far about the general stuff of the student loan plans?
Just to clarify.
I do have a question.
Let's say Hayden.
Yeah.
Sorry. So if you do the repayee and you change loan plans throughout, like say you change loan plans in 5 years, does that subsidy go away?
Cool. So what she asked there is, hey, if I do repayee because I'm a resident and then I change later, what happens to that subsidy? So you already got the subsidy, so you don't have to worry about them clawing it back, meaning giving you that money that they forgave earlier. But this actually brings up an interesting point. I talk about your principal balance. Actually, I talk about here, we have a principal balance and we have an accrued interest. You guys all should have received something that looks similar to this, just this is an older, uglier version. So you probably have a principal and an interest. If you change repayment plans, if you miss a payment, if you do anything other than pay on time, all that interest gets capitalized. It gets turned into principal, right? So this person right here has $93,000 of principal and $11,000 of interest, right? So every month, they're only paying interest on that $93,000, right? They only have to pay based on that principal balance. If they were to miss a payment or if they were to change payment plans later on in time, all that interest gets turned into principal, and now they start paying interest on all of it. Does that make sense? It may not be a bad thing, could be a good thing. You just have to understand that it's a thing, right? I'll give you an example. Let's say I'm in residency now, and I want that interest subsidy because I'm going to be paying less than my interest payment every month. So I want that subsidy so I do not have this big bucket. But I'm worried because, I'm going to get married and I'm going to be making a lot of money. And I don't want my spouse's income included in my student loan payment plan. So I'm going to end up switching to payee later on. I want to switch your payment plans from repayee to payee so I can make sure I have that cap of the student loan, the standard plan. Does that make sense so far? So all this student loan interest is accrued interest would get turned into principal at that time, but it may keep my student loan payments lower if I'm going for forgiveness. that make sense? Kinda. So now you guys are starting to see why student loans are so difficult. It's because there's a lot of intricacies here. The basic stuff is real simple. Hey, pay this off in 10 years and you're good to go. But there's also this forgiveness stuff I want to shoot for. I got to work for the right type of people. And if I change payment plans, I get this little subsidy. And if I don't do that, then I don't get it. And my significant other is going to make 200 grand next year because they're a baller. And now I have to pay extra. And do I go for forgiveness or should I just pay it all off? And what's the best choice and what's the best math? That's when you get into the fun stuff, right? Hey, did I answer your question at all?
Kind of.
Yeah, that helped.
Steven, what was your question?
I thought you were talking to me. Sorry. I was going to also ask, so with that 3-year interest subsidy, that's 3 years from the start of the loan was taken out. So like an individual could have multiple loans taken out. So that 3-year subsidy does that make sense?
So the subsidy is not from when you take the loan out. The
okay.
subsidy is from when you start making payments on the loan.
Okay, gotcha.
Because you probably have a loan from like 4 years ago, so you wouldn't qualify for that. And it is when you're making payments. So you should be making payments on all your loans at the same time. Some of you may have loans from a previous time in college. So those loans would be on different timelines. They would have different payment amounts. They would have different rules. But for the most part, they're all going to be similar. Does that make sense? All right. Any other questions right now? Nope, all mutes. Okay. You should have all received one of these as well. This basically lists out what the title of your loan is. So what kind of loan is it? What interest rate is on there? Now, all of your loans are broken right now, okay? Everybody says 0. And that's because they are 0 right now. So back in March, they turned everybody's student loans to 0, and that runs until September 30th. So from now until September 30th, all your loans are 0% interest. So what that ruins is it ruins my ability to calculate what your student loan payments would be and what your student loan payoff timelines look like and all that stuff. But if you run this again after that 0% period is over, you run that same report, it'll come back and it'll say what your rate is. It should say what your principal balance is for all those loans. And it should say whatever your total balance would be, which means your principal balance plus any accrued interest that you have. Does that make sense? All right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about private refinance. So private refinance, so how do we decide if we want to refinance privately? Okay, how do we decide, I know I have these federal loans, I really don't care about the forgiveness because I'm not gonna work for a public service. I really don't wanna go for non-public service because I don't wanna pay for these for the next 20 or 25 years. Kind of what should I do here? Allison, don't look too hard at these numbers. They're just make-believe. All right. So I decided I want to pay this off in the next 5 years. Let me go out and get a better math, meaning I want to get a better interest rate to make this payment easier, right? If I'm paying 6%, then my payments, my $1,000 payment I'm going to make every month is going to go so far. But if I can get an interest rate of like 3%, that means my $1,000, same $1,000 payment is going to go a little bit farther. That make sense? All right. So here's some things we always want to look for. We want to make sure there's no prepayment penalty. Meaning there's no rule that says I have to pay this off over 5 years. I can't pay it off any earlier. Now they shouldn't have any prepayment penalties, but we just want to make sure it doesn't. We want to make sure there's no origination fees, meaning when I refinance my federal loans to private loans, they're not going to charge me money just to take over the loans. That would suck if you had $100,000 loans and they charged you $1,000 to bring it over, right? It's actually the opposite of what's happening right now. A lot of times if you transfer it over, you get a discount. I mean, they'll take off like $200 or $500 of your student loans. Sometimes you want to cherry pick the loans, right? Some of you have loans where the interest rates are not 0, have a wide range. Some people have interest rates of like 7%. I've seen student loan interest rates of 1.5%, right? You don't necessarily want to refinance all your student loans if they don't all have high interest rates. And then you want to compare on different companies, right? So there's a ton of companies out there that'll do it for you. You can look at Credible, you can look at Common Bond, you can look at Earnest, you can look at Lendly, you can look at Splash, you can look at SoFi, you can look at your local banks, you can look, if you're on the East Coast or West Coast, you can look at places like First Republic Bank, which has great rates sometimes. But you want to quote, you want to look around and see who has the best terms, right? And then you want to compare them and say, you know what? Did someone say something? Nope, my dog barked. Then you want to compare them and say, hey, this is a 5-year fixed rate. How does that really compare to like a 7-year? Like, what's my payment going to look like comparably? So what we'll do is after this meeting, we're going to send out a little spreadsheet for you guys to look at. If you're not planning on refinancing, there's no reason to look at it. But if you are going to refinance, this is just a cool little tool that'll tell you what's the best one. So if you just look at all these companies, these are all hyperlinks, and you compare them, what rates they're showing you, you can kind of say, you know, this one looks like a better term, but overall this one's going to be better. Does that make sense? And it should color coordinate itself to say good, bad, and ugly. Here's another tool. So a decision table. So if you were doing like a one-on-one student loan review with us, what we would do is we'd kind of, let's map all this out. Let's see what this looks like. I want to pay off my student loans, but does it make the most sense? Right? So we're going to compare here the best income-driven plan using PSLF, the best income-driven plan using non-PSLF. We're going to look at the standard plan. And then if we were to refi, what does 5, 7, 10, 15, 20 look like? All right. So in this scenario, we're going to take a person who is making $100,000 of adjusted gross income. They're single, they live in Missouri, and they have 0 dependents. All right. This is what their student loan interest rates are at right now, 5.4, the federal side. This is what they could refinance down to right now on the private side. So then what would their payments look like, right? So this person, if they did income-driven plan, probably PAYE, payee, they'd probably be paying $682 a month. They do that for 10 years. That's a total payment of $105,000. It would take them 10 years to do it, obviously, and they'd still have $43,904 left over, which would then be forgiven tax-free. If they went the non-PSLF route, meaning they just used one of the income-driven plans and paid the minimums, same interest rate, same monthly payment to start because they're still on PAYE. They just don't work for a not-for-profit organization. They work somewhere in the private sector. They're going to pay that for 13.25 years because that's just how long it took to pay it off. $153,000. There's no money left over in this plan. So there's nothing forgiven. There's no taxes due for it. If they did the standard repayment, meaning they paid off in 10 years, same interest rate, their payment's actually going to be $1,100 to start. In the next 10 years, they're going to pay $136,000 because they're paying a lot more every month. So they're paying less interest over the long term. It takes them 10 years to pay it off because that's how the standard plan works. Nothing forgiven, no tax bills, right? All right, so that's if they stayed in the federal system. Well, you know what? If I'm going to pay this off in 10 years, I might as well refinance. I might as well get a lower interest rate, right? So, all right, what if I want to pay it off in 5 years, right? So let's do that sheet and say, what kind of interest rate can I get on the private side? Well, I can get like a 3.3. That'd be pretty good. If I want to pay that off in 5 years, it can cost me $1,900 a month. I'd only pay $115,000 and it'd be gone in 5 years. Can I afford $1,930 a month? You know, now there's no more forbearance. There's no more forgiveness. If I can't pay this, if I lose my job, I still owe this money. If I'm up here in an income-driven plan and I lose my job, I just let the servicer know that I have 0 income now. So my income-driven plan is now $0 payment. I don't have that protection down here anymore. All right, you know what? $1,900 feels like too much money. So let me try maybe 7 years. What does 7 years look like? All right, interest rates are a little bit different. Sometimes they're less, sometimes they're more. They're going to depend really on your situation and the time you refinance. $1,400 a month. I pay $120,000. Takes me 7 years to pay it off. All right. 10 years, $1,000. Very similar, just with a lower interest rate. 130, 10 years. Maybe I want to stretch it even farther. I could go 15 years or 20 years. But now I'm getting kind of expensive. So now I might as well go this IDR route, right? If I'm going to go over 10 years anyway, I might as well just keep my payments low for now and shoot for forgiveness if something changes. Does this all make sense so far? What I want to emphasize here is that you can make a plan for the future and then you can change it down the line, right? So if I don't know for sure that I'm going to pay this off in the next couple of years, maybe I stay in these income-driven plans for now. Maybe I make extra payments still if I want to, but it gives me the flexibility, the security, and the option to go for forgiveness if I need to in the future. If I make this switch to private side, I can never go back. If I get to the private side and realize, I can't afford this payment anymore, I'm going to have to refinance to a different type of loan, or I'm going to have to change my budget, or I'm going to have to change my employment. Does that make sense? All right. So we talked a little bit about kind of the student loan problem. We talked about some of the student loan payment plans. We talked about the best payment plans. We looked at some loans here. I want to answer questions anybody has. And then if anybody wants, I want to look at your loans specifically as a group and say kind of what are our thoughts here or there. Okay. So first let's take general questions, and then I'll ask if anybody wants to share their specific stuff. So who's got questions? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. All right. So with the payment plan, with the interest subsidy, I know that it would turn into principal if you miss a payment, or if you change repayment plans.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like. What happens to it if you move it to a private loan? If you refinance into a private loan, what happens to that subsidy?
So the subsidy's already gone, right? So ignore the subsidy. So basically you just never got that interest.
Okay.
So you have your principal balance, let's call it 100,000. And let's say you were in residency, you did 2-year PGY 2, and you had a whole bunch of accrued interest, and the government subsidized half of it, right? But you still accrued like $8,000 of interest. So you have $100,000 of principal and $8,000 of accrued interest. What happens if I refinance? I have to refinance for everything. So I'm getting a $108,000 loan to pay off this loan.
Okay.
Also, if I then decide I want to make extra payments, but I want to stay in the federal system, I have to pay off this $8,000 first before I can put anything towards this.
Okay.
So let's say your payment is, $500 a month because you make like $100,000 a year. If I want to say, I'm going to start paying $750 a month, I really want to see that principal go down. That principal is not going to decrease an inch until you pay off all the accrued interest. So a lot of people, what happens is they start getting beat down by that because they're like, I'm making all these extra payments and I'm seeing no progress.
Yeah.
Because that accrued interest has to go first.
Got it.
Did that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else got a question right now?
I have a question.
Yeah.
When you were talking about for the forgiveness being taxed, and you mentioned like it would be like $80,000 to $90,000 in taxes, would that be a one-time thing, or would every single year they would somehow like divide it up, or is it just like a one-time lump?
So if you ever end up with a large tax bill with the IRS, they want it all at one time, right? So they want that one big payment. They may also work out a payment plan with you. Now, here's the tricky part. So I told you this plan started back in 2008, right? So 10 years later, we got PSLF 2018, but it takes 20 or 25 years to get non-PSLF forgiveness, where it's taxable forgiveness. It's never happened. Okay, 2008, the first time this is going to happen is 2028. So we don't actually know what this is going to look like when it starts to happen. We know what the rules say. We know how the math works. I don't know what the tax code will be in that future time frame, but no one's actually done it yet when we get there. So we don't know what special rules the IRS is going to make to say, hey, if you have this big, huge tax bill, the tax bomb, a lot of people will call it, you can pay it over 5 years. We don't know if there's going to be a special rule for student loans in forgiveness because it's never happened. And it won't for another 8 years. So October of 2028 will be a very interesting year. Good question.
Sorry, I actually have another question. What's your general advice, like with the current situation with COVID, with our 0% interest and everything? I mean, how long do we wait? Yeah, I guess like what should we be doing in terms of repayment strategies and plans and things like that?
All right. we have another CJ on our team hates when I answer this question, so I love doing it. So as of today, 6 p.m. Pacific, August 3rd, 2020, I would not make any extra payments to student loans right now. Okay, your student loans are at 0%. You're all in your grace period right now, first of all. If you were not in your grace period, let's talk about it as that way, right? So if you had consolidated or if you were not in grace period, I would not make extra student loan payments until something changes. I'm gonna wait. Steven's jumping back in. I want to make sure he hears this. He's gonna ask. Steven, can you hear me? Shake your head.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the question that was asked while you popped out was, what do we do right now with student loans that were in 0% interest, $0, thanks to COVID? So as of today, don't make any extra payments until that 0% interest is gone. So right now, that 0% interest is scheduled to sunset September 30th, right? So about 2 months from now. There is a provision in the CARES Act that would allow Congress to shift that from September 30th until December 30th, okay? So if that happens, $0 payments, 0% interest until December. So I'm not gonna refinance any loans that are at 0% interest. That would be silly. I'm not gonna pay anything that's a $0 payment because that'd be silly. So that's one option. You may have heard something about the HEROES Act. So the HEROES Act was another stimulus bill passed by the House of Representatives in May. It got to the Senate and nothing happened. In the HEROES Act, they extended that from September 30th, 2020 until September 30th, 2021. So that would mean that you would have $0 payments and 0% interest until next September. That bill has not passed. The Senate made the HEALS Act. Everybody fucking loves these acronyms. The HEALS Act, so far from what we know, this just happened last week, says nothing about student loans. President Trump has recently come out and said, we believe student loan forgiveness periods will be extended beyond September 30th. We don't know, okay? So here's what I would say, general advice, Allison. If your intention is to pay off your loans as soon as possible, I would begin making payments to yourself, meaning open a high yield savings account somewhere and put in every dollar that you're planning on making for payments and leave it in that account until something changes. So set your budget basically and say, I want to make $1,000 payments. I'm going to start doing that into an account that I can't get to and I can't touch. And then if and when that $0% interest goes away, I will make a bulk payment into that. Or at that point, I will refinance and I will refinance a lower amount. If that happens at the end of September, okay. If that happens at the end of December, okay. If that takes until next year, that side little pocket that you had could have $12,000, $20,000 in it, depending on how much you want to do. I've seen people pay, $4,000 or $5,000 a month if they really wanted to. That could be a huge pot of money, right? Have that set aside and then make that bulk payment. And if you're going for forgiveness, just thank the stars that they keep kicking this can down the road, because every month that gets kicked is one more month that you don't have to pay your student loans and you still get counted for forgiveness, right? Every loan payment that you miss or you pay $0 now is a loan payment that you're not going to have to pay 10 years from now. So you pay $0 today, that saves you from paying $1,500 10 years from now, 1 month. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Cool. Anybody else got a question before we talk specifics?
Yeah, I actually have a question to go off of that. Okay, maybe this is a silly question, but could you explain why, again, because there's no interest, that it doesn't make sense to pay it off now?
Yeah, okay, so.
I just want to make sure I understand, because in my,
Yep, yeah. Okay. So what Steven's talking about here is, if there's no interest right now, every dollar I pay goes directly to principal. Why would I not be making principal only payments right now? Like, that sounds like phenomenal math. And I agree with you. The difference here is if I have 0% interest for a set amount of time and there's an end period, as long as I make that bulk payment before that end period, I get the same benefit. I'll give you an example. This started in March, right? So March was when the $0 payment, 0% interest started. We had clients that were aggressively paying off their student loans. So they're paying $2,500 a month. The argument was, why don't I just keep making that $2,500 a month payment and it goes straight to principal? That's a phenomenal idea. My argument here is, since I know when this 0% interest ends, let's take that $2,500 and put it into an account. Now I have that money if I need it. If something happens, if my hospital gets shut down, if my clinic gets destroyed, if everybody catches COVID and I can't work anymore, now I have an extra emergency fund. If nothing happens, then I get to that September 30th deadline, I take all that money that I had, and I still make that principal only payment that I was gonna make monthly. So I want you to make that payment to yourself in a separate account, but I want you to hold on to it until the 0% interest is gone or about to go away.
Okay, so to clarify, your recommendation is to put it away, but like as soon as word comes out that it's ending, before it actually ends, if that's what we want to do, then you throw it all at it.
Yeah.
Like you still want to get the principal, you still want to attack the principal if you can, but you're just doing it, you're just playing the waiting game until the very last second you actually have to, in order to accrue all the other benefits, like you said. Okay.
If my intention is to pay this off quickly and I'm already making or planning on making those extra payments, I just want to have that flexibility. I always want to have options, right? So they say money gives power. Money is not power. Money gives you options, and having options is power, right? So having the option to use that money for something else. If I lose my job, if my significant other loses their job, if a toddler needs braces, I don't think they give braces to toddlers, but like if they did, boom, you'd have some money for them. Because now you have that access to that cash and you don't lose anything in the meantime. So anything between now and September, now it's next month for you guys now, but if that gets extended in any way, that's a couple months that now it gives you that flexibility. If anything happens, you have extra cash. Great question so far.
So I have another question actually.
I love it.
This one's from my wife. She wanted me to ask you. We were talking about it the other day. So obviously, like, I have student loans, I have a lot, I'm trying to pay it off, but we're also wanting to eventually save for a down payment for a condo. We live in California, so it's not gonna be a house, right? It's gonna be like a condo or something like that. So it's really tempting. Like, her question to me was like, well, because I was like, oh, we gotta pay off our loan first. Like, let's get that done, and then we can focus on saving for a down payment for a house. And she was like, well, why? Is there a reason why you tack the loan first, besides, like, obviously it's going to accrue interest and things like that? So, like, my question to you is, in general, in terms of financial strategy, if you're trying to buy and like go that route, you should pay off your loans first, correct? Or does it depend, or what are the considerations? Because she really wants to, like, let's put some away to save up for this down payment, right? So I just wanted to ask, like, what your thoughts were.
Yeah. So I hate using the term "it depends" because it's like the financial planner cop-out. I told you I would try to avoid it whenever I can, but this is really one where it's specific to your situation. If we get to a point where they say, you know, student loans 0% interest until next year, if the HEROES Act passes, Allison, then that gives you 12, 13 months that you could save as much as you can, and you could put that money towards a down payment. Now, obviously, California, if I'm recalling correctly, a house or condo in the Southern California Irvine area would be like $650 to $1.1 million. So that means you have to save. So that means you have to save a lot of money. So what you really have to do is you have to focus on your priorities and what's important to your financial unit, whether it's just you, it's you and a spouse, it's you and a dog. I don't know who your unit is. You got to understand what that value is, right? So if your goal is, I want to pay this off because I hate it, that's one thing. If I want to live in a house because I really hate renting, cool, that's a value, right? Mathematically speaking, if your student loans are at 6% and your savings for a house are only going to be at 1%, mathematically, that's an easy argument. But the emotional aspect is something I cannot quantify. If renting destroys your soul, then okay, let's focus on buying a house first, and student loans will just be a thing. But if that's the case, then maybe we start looking at other plans. Maybe I can look at does loan forgiveness even work for me? Like if my loans are going to get forgiven in 20 years, does that math even work? The rule of thumb here is if your student loans are about 1.5 times your income, your projected income, not your current if you're a resident, but if your student loans are 1.5 times your projected income, then some kind of forgiveness may work out for you. And if you work in a public service, it'll always basically work out for you. But if you're going to work in the private sector and your student loans are 1.5 times your expected salary, then maybe forgiveness is the plan. But that would require at least 20 years of payments, which could be soul crushing for people. Now, to go a step farther for your question here, like just for comparing a house, student loan debt is not viewed the same way as other debt when it comes to mortgage applications. Okay, so earlier I said student loans are different because we have simple interest rather than compound interest. But also when a mortgage broker or a lender is looking at your debt to income ratio, they're not looking at, they have $200,000 or $300,000 of student loans. They just care what your student loan payment is. And if you don't have a loan payment because it's 0% or $0, they care about what 2% of your loan is. It's kind of the rule of thumb there. Every loan servicer is going to be different. So you always want to work, or every lender is going to look different. So you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who understands kind of that situation. But it's out there, so you may still get that mortgage, right? And then even beyond that, when you're looking at mortgages, we'll talk about this down the line when we talk about home purchase, but there are special types of mortgages that have lower down payment costs, right? There are doctor loans and there are PharmD loans, like loans specifically for pharmacists, that only require like 3 or 5% down. So now, hey, I'm saving $1 million house, but that may mean I only need like $50,000 down as opposed to $200,000 down for a house in Southern California. So now we start doing that, figure that out and say, hey, okay, so, I want to buy this house in 3 years. I really only need $50,000 if this loan product still exists. Now, if I go for this income driven plan for a couple of years and I have a lower payment, I can put more towards here and it doesn't hurt me that bad in the long run, right? This is the first time that you guys are getting to see how all this like ties together. So financial planning is not just like one topic after another, even though that's the way we're going to do this conversation. It all ties back into everything else. So to your wife specifically, who says, why can't we just save for a house? Why do we have to focus on student loans? It really just comes down to the priorities that you'll have. Having these student loans for the next 20 years is not the best thing ever, but it's also not the worst thing ever. As long as we can project what our payments are, what they will be, and everything still works financially speaking, then it'll be fine. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's just like rent here is like almost a mortgage payment, right? So
Yep.
We're like at the point where it's like we're renting, but like we don't want it's not ours, right? So, but thank you. That was very helpful. Very, very helpful.
I will just touch on rent versus buy. Renting gives you the flexibility that owning does not. So if you ever had to move, wanted to move, or needed to move, it's harder when you have to sell, especially if there's a down market in the future. California hasn't seen a down market in a little while, but they will be back at some point. All right. Anybody else got a specific question or a non-specific question?
I have another question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they would use the previous year's income for my taxes.
Mm-hmm.
What if I was a dependent, like if my dad claimed me on his taxes, what would they do?
Yeah, so that's actually a special one. Ashley, thanks for bringing that up. So what they do is they look at your last year's tax returns. If you don't have a tax return from last year, then they're going to look at your income. So then they're going to need you to have some other kind of material to prove your income. So if you are currently working, then that would be your pay stubs, and you lose that ability to look back at a $0 year. Now, that sucks. But there's no way of knowing that beforehand, so it's kind of like spilt milk or broken eggs, like there's really nothing to do about it. So generally speaking, your servicer would request proof of current income if they do not have previous year's taxes to refer to. The way to find that out would be to apply. So when they request you in a couple months to apply for your loan forgiveness repayment or your repayment plan, click the tax button. It'll be one of the first choices. It'll say like pay via last year's taxes, and then it'll pull it up and it won't work, or it will. If it does, congratulations. If it doesn't, then it doesn't. And then you'll have to submit substantiating material. Does that make sense, Ashley? It's kind of a I don't have an answer for you answer.
Yeah, so basically if I was working the rest of this year, like they would use my pay stubs from this year. They wouldn't go off of what my dad claimed me.
Yeah, they're not going to take your dad's income, if that's a question.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, the difficulty there is, yeah, they would take what you're currently making and they would project that into a year, and you would make a payment based off of that. So you wouldn't get the benefit of the previous year. So maybe what happens is maybe you have to start making payments based on that substantiating material. But then when 2021 starts, you file your taxes right away, like as soon as you can. And then you resubmit your income verification based on your taxes. And then you get reverted back to the old one. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
That was a long S, so I'm just going to say it one more time just in case. So basically, as soon as you can file your taxes, if you have a lower year, then you file those taxes and you use those taxes to then reapply or re-qualify for your income-driven plan. So maybe you'd have a month or two that you'd make a higher payment and then it would decrease again. If this all gets kicked down the road, and luckily the HEROES Act works and no student loan payments until next year, it's all moot and you'll all still be based off of 2020's taxes. But good question. Who else has got a question? Yep.
This might be kind of more of a personal thing, so if you want to get into it, that's fine. But curious, originally I thought I had my plan figured out talking post-COVID, so none of the 0% fun stuff. But I initially thought maybe, boost the credit score, get the lowest refinance possible, do like a 15-year term, so I get the low monthly payment, but then make double payments, and that way I can save interest overall. But then you kind of pique my interest at the IDR. Is there, because you can kind of do the same thing, but as far as interest being built up, is it kind of a wash?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Are you climbing stairs, Sonia? So the question here is, I was looking at doing private refinance, so I get the lowest interest rate, I can make extra payments and pay the least amount of interest, or I go IDR and I get all this other thing. So I said student loans are special because it was simple interest instead of compound interest. That's true for federal, not for private, right? So if you had interest accrue on the private side, it would be compound interest. Now, it doesn't sound like that's going to be an issue. We just want to make that clear. To keep your minimum payments low is to stay in the income-driven plan. If you're going to make excess payments anyway, then it doesn't matter which repayment plan you're in because you're going to pay above and beyond them, right? So then you would be correct in saying, I want the least amount of interest to be charged. Let me get into that private plan. The benefit here is if you're putting yourself in the position for possible forgiveness. So I don't really care how much the interest rate is at a certain point if I'm going to go for forgiveness, right? But if it's going to take me 20 years, then that's a moot point. So if your intention is just to get super aggressive and pay this off, then yeah, you want to be getting the lowest interest rate. But what you could do is you could run that math out and say, if I get a 3% versus the 6% I have, what's the actual difference if I make the same payment, right? So you can go online, you can just find like a loan payoff calculator and just say, hey, this is what my balance is, and use principal and interest. This is what my interest rate is. This is how much I'm going to pay. When will I pay it off? And what will my total be? And then do the other one for the loan rate. And you'll see that percentage makes a difference, but it's not an end of the world difference. So I will a lot of the times lean towards staying federal as long as possible because I want the security and I want that ability to fall back on these programs that exist. So does that help at all? I feel like a lot of times you guys ask questions and I just say a bunch of words and I don't actually answer anything. But does that help at all?
Yeah, that makes sense. And then I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but say post-COVID, none of the stuff passes, it's October, we do the IDR plan. Did they not look at your tax records till the next October? Or how long?
So you guys will certify. So you'll start, your first payment should be due December, I think, is for most of you. Your first payment will be due in December. So you'll have to certify your income. If you're doing an income-driven plan, you have to certify your income by October, November timeframe, right? So my wife graduated in May of a year, not this one. Her first payment was November. She doesn't recertify until the following November. So then every November, you'd get an email that says, hey, it's time to recertify. Or you'd probably get in October, it's due by November, but it's time to recertify. And then you recertify and then check it. You can resubmit that whenever you want. It would not be to your benefit to resubmit that if your income increased. It would be to your benefit if it decreased. But you only file your taxes once per year anyway. So if you recertify every November, you're basing it off the previous calendar year's taxes. So in 2020, you're using 2019 numbers, right? So that's actually a huge benefit because you're getting that whole extra year before the income's actually touching you for student loans, which makes it easier to go for forgiveness. Because, you know, it takes me 10 years for public service, 20 years for non-public service. But if I can get like 3 years out of here from the start, basically, then let me do that. And now I only need 7 or 17 more, depending on my particular plan. Does that make sense? All right. Anybody else got a specific question? All right. Does anybody want to talk specifically about their loans? And I'm going to pull them up on screen. Austin, I'll get you second. Does anybody else want to go first? Anybody who's going for PSLF want to talk about it? Emily, you had your hand really high earlier. Do you want to talk? Sure. I can't hear you with your mic off, but I can read your lips a little bit. All right. So if it's okay with you, can you give me a yes, a verbal yes, that I'm going to pull your stuff up?
Yes.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pull this up. Now my program's not going to work perfect because you have 0% interest on all these loans.
Is he frozen for you guys?
Yeah, he's frozen.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll be back. Am I back yet?
Yes, you're back.
I told you it was going to happen. I knew it. I'm glad I made it that far though. All right. So, all right. I'm going to share my screen here with y'all. Emily, can I get one more verbal yes?
Yes, sir.
All right, so this is what we have here. So Emily is going to have very similar loans to most of you. So right now it looks like you have $209,000 of loans, right? So that includes $187,000 of principal and $21,000 of accrued interest. Does that look right based on what I sent you earlier?
Mm-hmm.
It should. So, okay. You have made 0 cumulative PSLF payments, okay? So once you apply for PSLF, your loans will get moved from your servicer. Who's your loan servicer right now?
I believe it's Navient.
Navient. Okay, so no matter what happens, they're going to change loan services at the end of the year. We're just going to ignore all that until it actually happens. But when you apply for PSLF and it gets approved, I mean, they just accepted the application, doesn't mean anything happens. They move your servicer. Right now it's to Fed loans, but it'll move to whatever that servicer is at the time. And they will start counting your payments. Now, as I said earlier, they're only going to add this up when you apply. So they'll only move up in like numbers of 12, basically. All right, so we want to get this number to 120. It looks like you've already made 9 payments. So that means you had some previous loans, probably from undergrad, and you took some time off and you worked and you made some student loan payments and then you went back to farm school. Is that right? Yep. All right. So you have 9 payments towards some of your other loans. That's why you have so much accrued interest. All right, so we have direct Stafford unsubsidized loans. This is grad school. And we have direct grad plus loans, which means you had living expenses while you were in grad school, and we're cool there. All right, so let's go to the list of loans. So on this list of loans here, I can see that I have direct plus graduate, direct unsubsidized, which is graduate school, grad school. Okay, so no undergrad loans anymore.
Correct.
Did you go to grad school more than once?
No, This is all from pharmacy school.
Okay. So what we can do now is we can start to look at, or do you have any private loans?
No.
All right. So no private loans to worry about. What we can do here is we can start to look into the future and say, what would my payments look like once that full payment starts to hit me? All right. So we're going to play here. Do you want to share some more information?
What kind of information?
Like this kind of information.
Oh, sure.
All right,
You
so
can
what
put
what are you supposed to be making this year?
68,000.
68?
Yeah.
You're working at a hospital in a residency?
No, I have a residency.
Okay. So we have 68,000. We're going to give you a 3% salary increase. What state are you in?
Arizona.
Hey, I'm in Phoenix. All right. So federal tax rate is going to be kind of on its own. State tax rate is going to do on its own. Are you married or single?
Single.
All right. So we're single. Repayment start year. We're going to start. I'm basically going to put this at 2021 because although your first payment's going to be in December, just for math sake, it's going to be easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Investment return, if we were to invest money, and I'll explain this later on, we would get like, let's call it 6% return. You are going for PSLF.
Mm-hmm.
You are going for graduate, you do have graduate loans. All right, now this is where the program is going to break. So this math is going to say how much your rates are going to be over time, yada, yada, yada. It's going to say you're going to pay this off earlier than you really are because it's not calculating any interest, and that's not real life. But
Right.
I'm going to warn you that a couple times. How long are you doing PGY1, PGY2?
I'm hoping to do PGY2 as well.
Okay, and then after that, what do you expect to earn?
Let's be conservative and say 100,000.
Enough zeros? I think so. All right, so then I'm going to give you that consistent, I'm going to give you that consistent $100,000 with a 3% increase from then on out. All right, so by 2044, you'll be making 186. Congratulations.
Oh, wow.
No spouse to calculate for right now. The thing here is all these numbers are going to change, right? So if you were to get married or domestic partnership or anything like that, then your spouse's income would or would not be included depending on your loans. If you have any children in the future or you purchase any of them, which is what I call adopting, then they will be included as well. So all these numbers will change. So we're really just kind of playing off the system, right? So what this says is that the first year that these loans actually start counting, right? 2021, you're gonna be paying $351 post-COVID per month. The next year, $368 post-COVID. It takes an extra year for that student loan thing to kind of hit. And then we get $600. So once that $100,000 finally started to hit, now we're paying $600 a month, and then it'll increase, right? Now, obviously, a lot of things are going to change here. Income hopefully is higher than what I'm projecting. You may have a significant other, you may have kids, you may have something. But if this held, and if for some reason you had 0% interest the whole time, then you would still owe $137,000 at the end of this time period, and all that would be forgiven tax-free. So
that's the hope.
You hope, right? So what I can say is that if my income numbers are correct, then you will have paid $71,000 to your student loans. Now that number would be correct if my income is correct. Now, since the interest is zero, we believe you're paying more principal than you really would be. So this forgiven number would actually be higher.
Yeah. When I've done it before, it's been somewhere around like 160,000 and I've paid like 64,000.
Yeah. So this number should be pretty close, depending on the income projections that I'm saying. This number is going to be low just based on interest. But this says, hey, at the end of this 10 years, I'm going to get $140,000 forgiven. So what does that tell me? I should probably keep working in this PSLF for as long as I can. And if I leave and I don't work for that PSLF company anymore, I either want to go to another company that qualifies for PSLF, another organization, or I need to be aware of that decision, right? Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's talk about hypotheticals for a minute. So when we're talking about PSLF, we can see now that this is all this money that's going to be forgiven, right? So this is a huge value. I definitely want to do that. I don't want to pay $200,000 off. I want to pay $71,000 off, right? That's easy math. But when you start looking for jobs or you start looking to move jobs, this is the kind of consideration you need to have, because you maybe could go work in the private sector and you could maybe make $125,000 a year instead of this $100,000 a year. So then you start to figure out, well, what would my student loan payments be then, and how long would it take me to pay them off comparably? I'll speak personally here. When we moved from California back to Arizona, my wife had the $200,000 of student loans, just like most people here. And we had to decide private sector or public sector. Make more in the private sector, get forgiveness in the public sector. Maybe more stress over here, maybe more ability to mentor over here. You have to weigh all these pros and cons of all these tasks. Student loans is just a chunk of that to decide which one of these is the best decision. And $130,000 forgiven tax-free is a pretty good benefit. So this kind of lines up with what you'd seen before. Obviously this number not, but.
Yeah.
So if you're already working for a company that qualifies for public service and you have debt that's more than 1.5 your income, this is the easiest decision to make. Does anybody want to show me a scenario that's not as clean as this one? And Emily, just to tie off loose ends here. Right now you're in a grace period, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Until December. I actually just looked at the student loan website. It said my first payment's due like December 10th.
So for you, I would recommend you go and consolidate your loans. So go to studentloans.gov and apply for consolidation. It'll smash all these into like one loan, and your $0 payments would start tomorrow. Or it would start at the beginning of next month.
But then would I still qualify for PSLF?
Everything still qualifies. Direct consolidated loans qualify. But what that does is if your first payment's due in December and we're going to bump it up to, or December, we're going to bump it up to September, that gives us an additional 3 payments at $0 that we wouldn't get if we waited until December. If you wait until December, 10 years later, you're going to make your last payment November of 2030. Mm-hmm. If we start paying now, we reconsolidate, we're gonna make our last payment in August of 2030. So whatever our payment would be at that end time frame, which we said was, whoa, just happened. Oh, I did the old one. I like this old version better. So this payment right here, this $780 a month, mm-hmm. we can basically save 3 months of that by consolidating now. So you're saving $2,100 in the long term by consolidating now, taking these 0 payments because you didn't make any money last year, probably.
No.
And starting that process ahead of
I guess I thought that reconsolidating made your loans ineligible, or am I thinking of refinancing?
Yeah, I want to split your terms up there. So refinance goes private. Consolidation just smashes your loans together. So
okay.
All of these loans would smash into one direct, unsubsidized fund.
Okay.
So you can do that. You can go to studentloans.gov and you can see what that would look like to apply for consolidation. Or you can just reach out to Navient and tell them. The issue there, and I love people at Navient, they're not always the smartest people. They work in call centers, okay? They may screw it up. So you want to make sure that they are consolidating and not refinancing you to something else. Consolidation doesn't change your interest rate. It doesn't do anything. What it does is just smashes them together. You get a weighted average of whatever your other interest rates were. So all of these have interest rates. You're going to get a weighted average of that, and they're going to round up to the nearest 1/8%. But for the most part, it's going to stay the same.
Okay.
But it's just going to start your payments earlier than it would have otherwise. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you can also just wait this out and stick to the normal plan. You're going to save $2,100, but really what's $2,100 over a 10-year plan? If something makes you feel more comfortable, the emotional aspect is the variable that I can't calculate for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question if you don't care.
I care, but I'll take it.
So I am not going to do PSLF. And I was looking while you were doing her demo that one of her loans is $1,000 and one's like $13,000. Obviously, you'd be able to pay the $1,000 in a residency year, but maybe not the $13,000. Mm-hmm. If you consolidate it, then going back to what you said about the interest, like you have to pay the interest off first, but if they're in individual loans, could she just pay off that 1,000?
Yeah. So earlier when I talked about consolidation, it was like, hey, we got to cherry pick what we want to do, just like with refinancing. So two things. One, if a loan balance is really small and you want to pay it off separately, cool, do that. If one interest rate is better, that changes things too, right? If we look at our student loans as a whole, I have $209,000 of student loans here. The fact that they're divided up across 10 different loans doesn't really matter. One of them is $1,000 and one of them is $37,000. That doesn't really matter. It's all the same $209,000, right? So me paying $1,000 towards that loan doesn't change anything in the long run as me paying $1,000 into the $37,000 loan, right? It's the same $1,000 coming out of the same $209,000. The difference there would be if one has a higher interest rate, I could choose to pay that one off faster. So if for some reason one of these loans had like a 7% and everything else was at 5%, if I paid $1,000 extra, I wanted to go to that 7% loan. That's the math that makes a difference. If you're not going for PSLF, consolidation doesn't really do anything for you. I mean, if you're going for non-PSLF forgiveness, long-term, it does. But if you're going to refinance and pay it off early, you just want to refinance and pay it off early.
Okay. Thank you.
Does that help?
No, that helped a lot. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else got a specific question? Does anybody want to see their loans, or does Allison have to run away?
No, I won't run away. I just wanted to clarify, although it is getting late, I just did want to clarify. So if you're not doing forgiveness, consolidation doesn't help. So then should we like be cherry picking essentially at the amounts that are accruing the largest amounts of interest and just like throw all your money at those loans and then just let the other ones kind of build it up?
Yeah. So if you are not going for any type of forgiveness, right? I'm going to pay this off as soon as I can. Then yeah, you want to pick whichever one makes the most financial sense, right? So generally, if you're going to pay it off early, then you'd want to refinance to get that lower interest rate. But if you want to keep it in the federal system because, hey, it's getting 0% now, or, I want to maintain that flexibility later, then yes, every extra dollar you pay, you want to go towards that higher interest rate. When your loans are all separate like this, you can choose where your extra payment goes. When your loans are not separated, when they're consolidated, it's only one place to go. So if we're going to pay it off, then we want to kind of keep them separate for a little while. When you refinance, it'll all smash together anyway, so you'll get a new interest rate. It sucks right now. Like, I really hate the fact that I can't see you guys' interest rates because it makes this conversation harder. So if you were to run this report again, let's say whenever the 0% interest ends, this will look a lot different. And luckily, we'll still kind of be in this program. So maybe we come back to this when everybody has new NSLDSs and we talk about it again. Hopefully they just kick that can and nobody has 0 interest rates for the rest of the year, but who knows? Who else got something for me, or who else wants to see their stuff?
So actually, I got a question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
If I'm planning on paying off my student debt within a year to 2 years.
Nice.
Hopefully. But so would it be worth it to just go more private and get the lower interest rate as I'm paying it off right away? Because it really doesn't make a difference if I have a payback plan for 10 years and just pay it off early. I'm not really going to get a benefit from it, right?
Yeah, if your intention is to pay it back off as fast as you can, and Cassie, just looking at your loans here, if you're going to pay that off in 2 years, I salute you. So congratulations, like, do that. But we don't want to do any kind of refinances when we're in the $0 time frame. We don't want to do anything when we're at 0%. But yeah, once this is over and we're going back, like, there's no reason to eat 6% if you can go out into the private market and get 2% or 3%. So then, yeah, it makes perfect sense to just go do that. It's just while we're in 0%, it's this magical world that we want to stay in as long as possible.
Yeah, just because I know I do have I feel like it's a lot of debt, but it's not that 1.5% that you were talking about last week. So I feel like it wouldn't be worth doing the PSLF in the long run, and it'd save me a lot more money and headache if I just do it right away, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't always like make sense to do PSLF, right? So mathematically, I can show like why you'll pay the lowest amount if you do this over 10 years, but it also takes 10 years. I know pharmacists that work at like the VA that have a special program that says they'll match dollar for dollar to your student loan payments up to like $13,000 a year. So then, yeah, you can get PSLF forgiveness at working at the VA, but you can also pay your student loans off in 6 years and then not have to work at the VA anymore. So that's a huge benefit. So yeah.
IHS is kind of similar too.
Yeah. Yeah, IHS will give you what, $40,000 for every 2-year commitment?
I think so.
So Indian Health Services is IHS. Yeah, they'll give you about $40,000 for every 2 year for the first 2-year commitment, and you can keep re-upping that until you're done. So yeah, if you're IHS, then you should get this paid off, in the next 3-4 years probably. If you're doing it in 2 years, I mean, still.
Yeah. Thank you.
Good questions. Who else has got a question? Who's not going to walk away from this as a student loan expert? That's fine, guys. Anybody else? All right, so a lot of information today. Hopefully you walked away thinking, yes, I know exactly what I'm doing, or man, this is really interesting. Let me think about this more. Or man, my wife may actually get that house and I have to figure out how we're going to do it now. I want you guys to take away something from today. The fact that you're all still here says you're taking something. If you have more questions after this, if we start off next week's meeting really lost with student loans, we'll spend the time and we'll talk about it. But we're not going to go into individual. I'm not going to pull up anybody's specific loans. We'll just have general questions next week. So if you have anything else, now's the time. And if anything else pops up and you have a question, I will, you guys can email us those questions. And I'll do my best to answer them that way. But anything else or anything not related to student loans today that you want an answer for? Nope. All right, so, go ahead.
Question, I think you kind of already answered it, but so the benefit of doing like the IDR would be you're not glued into that payment, so you could possibly stash it back for something else, say like buying a pharmacy in 5 years.
Yep.
So would that be a no-brainer on doing IDR for at least the first couple of years instead of refinancing, so you're not locked into that rate?
It depends.
That's
down to your specific situation. Yeah, so doing IDR lets you get those lower payments, which allows you to save more money. If you have competing goals that you'd rather save that money for, then yes, that's a no-brainer. But that money does come at a cost. So you are going to be paying a little bit extra interest. Now it's simple interest instead of compound interest, so it's not as bad. It's not like a credit card balance or anything like that. But it is going to cost you a little bit. So you just need to find out, like, does that still be okay? Does that still make you feel fine? Does that still allow you to do all your goals? If so, then yeah. And if you put it aside for a future goal and you don't need it for that future goal, you can still always just put it at student loans. That money's still there and they'll still take it whenever you want to give it to them. But yeah, it gives you that flexibility. So I generally like to lead towards having those flexibility and options. But at a certain point, you got to commit to something and say, yes, I'm trying to pay this off as fast as I can. I'm going to start today. Or no, I'm trying to get forgiveness for all of this. And I'm going to do that. There's not really, you don't want to be playing around the in between. You don't want to pay your student loans for 16 years. I either want to get forgiveness or I want to pay it off. You just want to find out which plan works best for you. All right, I've seen 3 yawns in the last 5 minutes. So I think if nobody else has anything, nobody new, I'm going to wrap it up. All right. So the biggest takeaway here now is, where do we want to go next? So did you have something down there? No. Yeah.
I did have a question.
Go for it.
I know that we're mentioning that right now we're in the 0% interest rate. Let's say that September 30th is that date and it's going back to regular interest. What if I'm maybe giving a lump sum, but I'm not paying? So I'm in an MBA program, so I may think of deferring. So what are the implications of just paying maybe like $3,000 towards the loan and then putting it in deferment, or paying towards the interest only?
So if you just took $3,000 and paid off a chunk of your interest?
Yes.
That'd be cool. All that does is, so when the 0% interest phase ends, they're just going to start accruing interest again. So because your accrued interest, so that separate bucket in federal loans, does not accrue interest itself, paying some of it off will not change how much new interest you're accruing.
Okay.
But it will just get you $3,000 closer to paying it off whenever you get to the back end. So if you're still in school, so if you're going to defer again, because for your MBA program, I would argue that you probably have some $3,000 that you could put that towards as a better aspect of like taking less student loans at your MBA program or paying down other debt if you have it.
Okay.
I don't generally like to see people making student loan payments while they're still in school, because there's almost always a better way to do that. But that would be specific to your situation.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Where do we want to go next? What would you guys like to talk about next? I'm trying to find, I didn't build this slide deck right. Trying to find the list of topics, but does anybody have a topic that they want to talk about and throw out while I'm looking for it? Nobody's got any. All right, let me share my screen then. So next meeting is 2 weeks from today. So that is the 17th. And we can talk about any number of topics, right? So we did student loan analysis today. We can talk insurance and benefits. Okay, just covers on what that means, what kind of insurance this is, and how benefits work. We can talk about investments. We can talk about retirement. We can talk about taxes, estate planning, credit, salary negotiation, home purchase, real estate investing, birth of a child, education planning. We can schedule an Ask the Tims, which is where we'll bring in our 3 Tims and let you guys talk. That'll probably be safe for the end, but also any other topic that anybody wants to talk about today. So anybody want to throw out an idea? Otherwise, I'm going to have to post a poll.
Investment and retirement.
There we go. That's a topic. Okay. So generally we're going to try to do this in 2 parts, but I might try to smash it back together for y'all just to save some time and not waste 2 meetings. So, okay. Investment, retirement. Anybody else got a preference? I'll make a poll if we have more than one. If not, we're going with investment, retirement. Speak now for
investment, retirement too.
I got 2 for investments. We're winning. Speak now, forever hold your peace.
I agree with the investment and retirement.
We got 4. Okay, we're good. Okay, so our next meeting is 2 weeks from today, August 17th. We're going to talk about investments and retirements. I will send out the link for that meeting. I will also send out a tool that we're going to use during that meeting that you guys can all play with live while we're talking. So we have one of those again. Oh, if nothing else, everybody have a wonderful evening. Allison, I think it's like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock almost. So
10.
Get some sleep.
I'm working from home this block, so.
Like right now?
Like, yeah, as of today, I get to work from home for my rotation. It's drug info. So.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Everybody else, have a good night as well, and I will see you in 2 weeks. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks, Robert.
Thank you.